Jack Watling, a senior fellow at the Royal United Services Institute, spoke about the Ukrainian offensive in a column for the Financial Times. The main takeaway from this report. For the past 2 months, Ukraine has been engaged in intense battles in an attempt to break through the Russian defensive lines, with minor incremental advances. However, over time, Ukraine has started to gain an advantage for itself. The question now is whether it will be able to push Russian forces to a breaking point. With the start of the Ukrainian offensive in June, Russia adopted a new tactic. It allowed the Ukrainians to enter minefields and then aggressively counterattacked using tanks and anti-tank weaponry on the flanks. After disabling Ukrainian armored vehicles, Russia unleashed mortar and artillery fire on infantry positions. After attempts to break through minefields with explosives resulted in casualties, Kyiv adapted its tactics. It began to strike from the flanks before attempting a breakthrough. In this way it was able to reduce losses, but difficulties with planning and reconnaissance have slowed the process, with the Ukrainians taking no more than 700 meters at a time. This gives Russia a chance to catch its breath. However, accelerating this process would lead to unacceptable losses in equipment for the Ukrainian armed forces. Therefore, for the Ukrainians, the key is to balance between losses in equipment and expanding breakthroughs when they arise. But Kyiv has become adept at counter-battery warfare. It is good at finding and destroying Russian guns and radars with high-precision Western projectiles. The systematic erosion of Russian artillery has been a game-changer. For the first time in the entire war, Ukrainian howitzers are able to fire continuously at Russian positions. Moscow still has the means to hit Ukrainian armored vehicles in minefields, but it now has less artillery power to hit infantry that unloads from vehicles and advances on positions. As a result, Ukraine succeeds in capturing Russian positions even when its equipment is intercepted in open areas. This leaves Moscow having to use the equipment even more aggressively, but the closer it gets to the front, the more vulnerable it is. It is being successfully hunted by Ukrainian drones. Ukraine destroys Russian command posts, warehouses and depots deep behind the lines thanks to Storm Shadow. Alongside successful counter-battery efforts, Russian infantry is experiencing diminishing support. Coupled with this, Ukraine also has heavy losses in equipment. Especially the defense forces suffer from the constant attacks of Russian helicopters, which hit vehicles 8 to 10 kilometers from the front line, flying at low altitude out of range of air defense. The question is which side can withstand the current level of attrition. On the southern front, Russia's 58th All-Russian Army has taken the brunt of the attack. A quarter of its personnel are in firing positions and they have few reserves. Ukraine meanwhile has thrown additional units of the 10th Army Corps into the fray to keep up the pressure. At some point, Russian infantry may find themselves scattered in a thin line along the front, and without sufficient artillery and armored vehicles, the defenses could sprinkle. The weather may allow Ukraine to continue its pressure until early November. And from that point onwards, the course of events will depend on which side is better prepared for winter warfare. Admittedly, I love hindsight and this was not the worst report I've read, so I'll leave it without my comments. But let's go back a little less than a year ago. Western officials assert that the war in Ukraine is in an operational stalemate, and neither side can develop sufficient ground combat capabilities to influence the course of events. This, on August 20, 2022, CNN wrote citing Western unnamed officials. And 2 weeks later was the Kharkiv operation, and during the offensive Ukraine recaptured more than 500 settlements and 12,000 square kilometers of territory. This is the main point I wanted to make today. Thank you for the time you have spent with me.